we're about to wrap up. We think this is a platform that, can change the world. There's people doing very interesting projects, and people from the school need to recognize the value of their network. And the people that are here, talking to the guys, some of them don't even know each other. So if you're in the school, if you're in this network, tap in and make the most out of it. All right, so I'm done with my applauses. Very proud of them, though. The last speech of the night is Mr. Damian Fraser. He is the head of UBS Mexico. Damian has a very interesting story. He is a true lane changer as well. I won't go into too much detail, but he had a very important position as a journalist in the Financial Times. He switched into banking. He's been in banking for a while. He has a bachelor's in philosophy, economics, and politics from Oxford University. He then has an MPA from Harvard, a Master in Public Administration from the Kennedy School, and he's also a chartered financial analyst, is the correct term, maybe? Yeah? Thanks. CFA, that's an extremely difficult certification to get. He manages 180 people at the Mexico office, and he's also an ASF dad of 3. So we're very happy that Damian accepted to be here tonight. Without further ado, we'll let him take the stage. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Nicolas said, I have several ties to the American school. I have 3 daughters who have been at the American school, one who just graduated last year, Anna Sophia Fraser. In fact, we called her Anna Sophia Fraser. So that all the American school T-shirts would belong to her. And she still wears them. I have Oriana somewhere over there. Oriana? She's probably quite embarrassed at this moment. And she's my second child, and Miranda, who's a freshman in high school. And I have to say, based on what I've heard this evening, I'm so happy that my children went to or are at the American school. I'm so impressed and a little bit intimidated that I have to speak after these accomplished people. I'm not really that qualified, in fact, to speak about changing lanes, because nothing much has changed in my life in the last 18 years. I live in the same house as I did 18 years ago. I work for exactly the same company. I have the same commute. Even my dog is called Hector, and my previous dog was called Hector. So so there's Oriana, in case you don't recognize her, and there's Hector 1 and Hector 2 and Hector 1 again. So I haven't done very good at changing, but a long time ago I did do a few changes, and maybe that's why I was asked to speak today, and 3 in particular. My first change, as we heard from Nicolas, is that I changed careers. I changed from journalism to banking. When I was a journalist, I came to Mexico and everything was pretty good. Mexico had just privatized Telmex, they were privatizing the banks, they were negotiating the free trade agreement with the United States, the stock market was booming, the currency was strong, people were very, very enthusiastic. I arrived and everything more or less went wrong. So Colosio got assassinated, there was the Chiapas rebellion, which I got to cover as well. There was obviously the collapse of the peso, and many other things went wrong. So I got a pretty interesting time, but then I changed to banking, and I'll go into that in a moment. And then, more or less simultaneous to this, I changed countries. I had a varied life in England, as you can see. At one stage, I was a punk rocker at the top, and then I became very upwardly mobile socially, and hung out with people in top hats and the Queen. And I changed to Mexico, and I didn't just change country, but at this point, I changed friends, I changed family. Most of my friends are now Mexican. My family is obviously Mexican, and as you can see, I became a charo. So the third change is that even though nothing has actually changed in my life, the things that I do have changed. So Mexico is not comparable at all to the country it was 20 years ago. Banking isn't comparable, journalism isn't comparable, and even my children have grown up, although sometimes I doubt that. So what I'm going to do, even though I'm uniquely unqualified to do this, is to give 10 pieces of advice from my career to you, the few students that are here, and the parents and the alumni. If they have children, maybe it's of interest to them, and the alumni one day may have children, or maybe they're still at the beginning of their career, and it may be useful to them as well. And I should say that my experiences are not that necessarily relevant for other people here. I've been quite fortunate. I went to a very good private school in the United Kingdom, Aberforth. I think Geronimo went there as well. Maybe some other people went there for a year or two, which is a great school. And although I didn't have many financial advantages, both my parents were well-known writers, which opened a lot of doors in my life that might not have been open for other people. So my first lesson is, don't worry if you have no idea what you are going to do, because even if you do have an idea what you're going to do, you're probably going to end up doing something very different. So in my case, as Nicolas said, I studied philosophy and politics at university, and then I did a master's in public administration, and I was absolutely set on being a civil servant in the UK government. That's what I wanted to do, and that's why I did public administration. And when I was at Harvard in the summer, I couldn't get a summer job in the United States, so I didn't have a visa, and I couldn't get a summer job in the UK civil service. They didn't offer them. And a friend of mine's father, I bumped into him, and he said, well, why don't you work at The Economist? I'd never written a single story, even for the school newspaper, let alone for a university newspaper. And I took it because I had nothing else to do. And on more or less on my first day at The Economist, the Berlin Wall was falling. And I proposed to write an editorial on how West Germany was going to take over East Germany, and it was going to be akin to a hostile takeover in the stock market, and they were going to impose their efficient Germanic ways on East Germany, and it was going to be a big success unification. And they liked the idea. They asked me to write it. I wrote it, and as a result of that, I got to write a few other pieces, and I got offered a summer job at The Economist, and I got offered a full-time job at The Economist after the summer. So I became a journalist having never thought that I would be one. What I would say is, even though you don't know what you're going to do, or you shouldn't know what you want to do, you should focus on a few core skills. I think it's really useful if you learn how to write well at university or after university, because especially in this day and age of email and everything else, so much communication is done through writing. I think it's really useful if you're numerate and comfortable with numbers. And I think it's really useful if you know how to be logical and you know how to reason. Frankly, and I'm obviously biased because I studied it, but I think philosophy is the most useful degree you can find. And I'm probably the only person who thinks that. But the reason for that is if you're crossing a bridge and you're not sure if the bridge is well built or not, what you really want is that the engineer who built the bridge to be an engineer who's robust and logical and accurate in his calculations. The same could be said of any other career, including banking. So here, if you study philosophy, you'll recognize the syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. And then you'll see Woody Allen's take on that, and that is, all men are mortal, Socrates was mortal, therefore all men are Socrates. And if you can spot the fallacy in the Woody Allen syllogism, you're ready to get a job in an investment bank. So the second lesson that I would entertain to give you is to what is the second lesson? Luckily, my wife went shopping and gave me a piece of paper. Okay, the second lesson is you never know where opportunities are going to come from. And this is really, really important. When I was at The Economist, I was asked to go to Mexico because they couldn't find anyone else to go to Mexico just for a week. I was happily living in London. and write a story about President Salinas. And I went to Mexico, met lots of people, made a lot of friends actually in a very short period of time, most of whom curiously remain my close friends in Mexico. And I went back very excited by Mexico, but thinking I wouldn't return. I wrote my story, which was quite a positive story. You can look it up on the internet if you're interested. And then a friend of mine in London asked me to play tennis, and my doubles partner, who I didn't know, happened to be the foreign editor of the Financial Times. And then we started talking about Mexico, and he said, you know what, the Mexico position at the Financial Times, which is a sister publication, is open. Are you interested in interviewing for it? And I said, sure, I'll interview for it. So my permanent move to Mexico came from a tennis game. I also recommend tennis as a way of getting ahead. But I would say that you never know when job offers are going to come, when your life is going to change. You just have to be open-minded and curious. At UBS, I offered a job to actually an ASF alumni, Thomas Lajou. I don't know if anyone knows him. He was dressed up as a prostitute in a prostitute and nun party. And he struck me as rather intelligent and gifted, so I arranged to interview him and gave him a job. So you can even be dressed up in an inappropriate fashion and find that you get a job. So I'll move on to my third lesson, which is bluff, take risks, go out of your comfort zone. So when I went to interview with the editor of the Financial Times, a very distinguished guy called Sir Geoffrey Owen, for the job, I knew I had one particular weakness with respect to getting this job as the FT correspondent, which is that one of the requisites was fluent Spanish, and I didn't speak a word of Spanish. But I went for the interview anyway, and I was prepared for the question. And so Geoffrey, halfway through, said, so Damian, how's your Spanish? And I looked at him straight in the eyes, and I said, Sir Geoffrey, if you want, we can continue this interview in Spanish. He said, oh no, that won't be necessary. So bluff, go out of your comfort zone. I then moved to Mexico and got a job and got a job in a country that I didn't know, in a language that I didn't speak, and spent a few weeks in Cuernavaca and learned the Spanish that sadly I still have. So moving on to my fourth lesson, which is something that probably is not going to apply to many of you, but I thought I would give it anyway, which is what does journalism teach you in other professions? Why is it worthwhile being a journalist, even if you're not going to stay as a journalist? I think journalism is really useful in teaching you to adapt. When I was a journalist, I got to cover coup d'etat in Venezuela, I got to cover civil war in El Salvador, I got to cover interest rate policy at some moment in the United Kingdom. As I mentioned, Colosio assassination, the Chiapas rebellion. Every day, things were changing, and you learn how to adapt, and that's really useful skill to have because nothing really phases you. When Colosio was assassinated, it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Mexico time, it was midnight in London, and I had to write a story in half an hour not knowing what had happened. When you've gone through that experience, and it's going to be on the front page of a paper, you remain relatively calm under pressure thereafter. You also learn how to write, and what I would say is that's a really useful skill. You learn how to use short words, you learn how to use the active, you learn that most people aren't going to read beyond paragraph 3, so if you have something relevant to say, make sure it's in the first 2 paragraphs. You learn not to take things too seriously, because most people are very bored by what you have to say anyway, so try and crack a joke if you can. And you learn that many people lie to you, and that's really useful. People lie to you to protect their reputations, to inflate their egos, because they have something to hide. And that's really useful if you're a banker, knowing that people lie to you, because then you don't lend them money. And I feel that I'm maybe somewhat more skeptical than some of my banking peers that haven't gone through that experience. So I arrived in Mexico and moved into an apartment in Polanco, Parque Lincoln, learned a bit of Spanish. And I quickly realized that I had to adapt to the Mexican culture. And that's my next lesson. I think maybe we're on my 5th at this point. And I learned that there were actually a lot of differences between Mexico and the United Kingdom. We all think because we went to the same universities and around the world that we're all the same, but actually we're not. So the first difference is Mexicans, in my opinion, and apologies for these massive generalizations, but Mexicans are not afraid of violence. They're not afraid of drug wars. They're not that afraid of reckless driving. And they're not afraid of drunken reckless driving. What Mexicans are really afraid of is silence. And you notice that when you go to the Mexican countryside and everyone has a radio on. But you also notice that when Mexicans become really, really rich, which occasionally happens, the first thing they do is they build a huge house next to another rich Mexican, whether it's Punta Ixtapa or Bosques de Santa Fe. When an English person gets really rich, he builds a castle really far away from other people. So whenever I go to England, I'm struck by how silent it is, and whenever I come back to Mexico, I'm struck by how noisy it is. So you have to deal with that. Second is hygiene. Mexicans are very hygienic, and British people are not. I don't know if you've noticed, but when in my office, in the office in Mexico, everyone is all the time brushing their teeth. I have never, ever seen a British person brush their teeth outside their home. This means that Mexicans have wonderful teeth, although they don't get maybe that much work done. And English, as you all know, have terrible teeth. A third difference, which is a cliche, but it's true, is spontaneity versus predictability. I often ask, when I go back to England, what Mexico's like, and I like to say, one of my lines is that in Mexico, when you wake up in the morning, you have absolutely no idea how your day is going to be. And I think that's pretty cool. I like it. And I look at this face of absolute horror on the English people saying, how can you live in a country like that? So that's a very important difference. Competition versus generosity. The English are obsessively competitive with everything. An Englishman, if you're playing tennis with him, he'd rather win the game and lose the friendship. Where a Mexican would obviously rather maintain the friendship and lose the game. In schools, as my children know, it's why they left England, there's an obsession with getting into a good university and taking 15 GCSEs and 7 A-levels and getting A's and everything, and that's all the parents ever talk about. And based on my children, at least, that's not the case in Mexico. Much more relaxed and laid back, and maybe that's why Mexico doesn't do so well in the Olympic Games. And then finally, time. In Mexico, obviously, we enjoy taking our time doing things, and that's wonderful. But we don't have a sense of things ending. So when I got married to Paloma, there was a cocktail party in London before our marriage. It said 7 to 9. And all the Mexicans thought that the party was starting 7 minutes before 9. And that's when they arrived, just as the party was ending. So I'm going to go on to my 6th lesson here, which is actually a little bit different to the previous one, which is be authentic. You have to adapt and be authentic, which is a complicated combination to pull off. But there's obviously something very annoying about a foreigner who comes to Mexico and complains about the lack of punctuality, the informality, the chaos, the disorder, and so on. That person should obviously leave. Stand up if you're one of them. But there's something also really annoying, I think at least, about a foreigner, a British person especially, who arrives an hour and a half late for lunch, who tells the same story over and over again at dinner, who's always brushing his teeth in the office. People expect you to remain some of your Britishness even as you adapt. And although we're talking about changing lanes, really what we're talking about is merging lanes. You don't give up your Britishness if you come to Mexico. You bring it to a new personality, which is a merger or a fusion of these two worlds. And I think that's important, that you don't lose touch with your past, with your own country, and with people that remembered you when you were young and handsome, if you were. So be authentic, be yourself, and you'll be better off. So I went back, after 4 years at the Financial Times, they had a policy that you had to return to home country, otherwise they were worried that you would marry the natives. In my case, I'd already married a native, so it was too late, but I went back to England to work on the Lex column of the FT. But my wife, who's somewhere over here, didn't like England. She didn't like the predictability, the punctuality, the obsessive competitiveness with everything. And as it happened, I'd had a job offer to come back to Mexico to work for a bank. So I thought I'd give it a shot. I knew basically after 3 weeks of English weather that I either had to change wife or change job, and it was easier to change job at that moment at least. So I came back, and I was completely miserable. I have to say, my next lesson, which I think is number 7, just 3 to go, the next lesson is, if you change careers, which I did, you have to be patient. You're not going to go from the same level that you were in your previous career to your new career. I was about 33. I had interviewed presidents and guerrilla leaders and traveled the world and knew lots of important people. And I was put in a cubicle next to 23-year-olds, 10 years younger than me, and was churning out Excel forecasts for corporate earnings, which I knew nothing about at all. And it took me some time to learn how to do it. I was very unhappy while I did it. But in the end, I learned how to do it. As Nicola said, I took a CFA, I worked at night, and I was able to kind of gradually work up the corporate ladder and shift jobs to something that was more suitable to my skill level. So be patient. Don't think it's going to happen don't think it's going to be easy. Don't give up. But if you want to explore another profession, I certainly would recommend that you do it. So there's my new self. Unfortunately, I'm not paid in Swiss francs. I'm paid in Mexican pesos. So the next one is how I have really done something which is quite unusual, which is I have worked 18 years consecutively for an investment bank. I think I'm the only person who's actually achieved that in this country. I've gone through a number of different crises, 98 crisis, 2001 crisis, 2008, and maybe the 2016 crisis. And so what are my lessons? My lessons are completely the opposite to what Alex was talking about. I'm obviously a banker, so we represent two different ends of the spectrum. My first, which means Alex clearly wouldn't get a job with us, is dress smartly and shave. Because people think that you're hardworking and serious-minded if you dress well, and make a special effort if you're hungover. So they don't know what you did the previous night. My next lesson, if it's a lesson with respect to how to survive 18 years, is work really hard and stand out. I'm amazed. I actually have never seen someone survive years at an investment bank if they're not willing to work harder than average. Don't be shy when the chairman of the bank worldwide comes to Mexico and there's a town hall. Be the one that asks the question. Prepare. Be a little bit aggressive. Stand out. Because it's tough out there, and you have to be the one that people remember. And then I would say, finally, get very lucky, because I've seen some of the most amazing people being exited because of mistakes that have been made. I would, ninth lesson, and I'll be really short on this one, is I think banking is a good career for certain personality types. Even though Woody Allen once defined a stockbroker as someone who invests your money until you have none left. And if you saw that movie, The Big Short, you probably would agree with that. But we do a lot of important and good things. We raise money for companies. Those companies use that money to grow, to invest. So at UBS, I've worked on the IPO of Volaris, which helped, along with Interjet and Viva, transform the aviation industry. We worked on the IPO of Santander Mexico, which gave money for it to grow its loan book, and so on and so on. So we do some useful things despite everything that you read. Banking is very meritocratic. and very globalized. A banker in Mexico does exactly the same thing as a banker in Australia, New York, or London. So you are competing and working with and being complementary with some of the smartest people in the world. And there are not that many jobs that offer that. And in short, I would say in banking, you were paid to think. You were paid to be creative financially, if that's not an oxymoron. And you are paid to add value to corporates, which in turn provide jobs and make the country a better place. So that's my ad, and I'm happy to take business cards in the cocktail party if I... Finally, I would say help people. There's a really good book by this guy called Adam Grant, which is giving the secret to staying ahead. And the argument of Adam, which there was also a New York Times Magazine piece about it, is you should basically do favors for everyone, and good karma will come back to you and make you a happier and more productive and more successful person. So if people ask, send you emails, reply to them. If people ask for meetings, give them. And if they're ASF alumni ask you to give a talk, even if you don't have anything to say yes, because maybe something good will come of it. So that's what I have to say. 15 minutes is almost exactly up. Change jobs, change careers, change countries, have fun, enjoy yourselves, work hard, and everything will be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damian. That was great. Do you have the... Thanks. This wraps up tonight's events, the talks. You're about to be able to go what you really came for, which is the food and drinks. Before that, just want to make a final recognition. So if all the speakers can come on stage, please. And if the Alumni Council can come on stage as well, please. We'll wait for the council to come down. The entrepreneur is figuring out his new business venture. He'll be here in a second. If the council could come on stage. Come on, guys. While this is happening, I'll let you know. There's a lot of ways you can contact the school and the Alumni Council. We have a Facebook page. It's called All ASF. Maria Jose, is that correct? Yep. ALL ASF Facebook page. You can also call the school, ask to speak to the Institutional Advancement Office. And what we really want is for people to submit projects. We have a network of people we reach out, but we're somewhat limited to 5, 10 plus minus years. And we really want to showcase alums from all different ages and age groups. So please submit the projects if you know. Please contact us if you want to get involved. We'd love to have you. So to finish it off, Sergio, how do they do it in the theater when they finish? Everybody grabs hands? Yeah? Grabs hands? And thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Thanks.